How's it going? Yes, today is Thursday. Before we get into what we're doing, let's start with greetings. Of course, like usual, hello, my name is Daniel. I'm your host. Your
guy in the chair.
He said it! He said it!
And of course, today being Thursday, we have the critical drinker. I don't know why I did that, but anyway. This is the crash and burn of the Kathleen Kennedy story. So let's sit back and enjoy.
Kathleen Kennedy. If ever there was a name synonymous with the destruction of pop culture franchises, the humiliation of beloved legacy characters, creative mismanagement, missed opportunities, and the unwelcome injection of the message into modern entertainment, it's this one woman. Yeah, other people have arguably committed worse crimes against cinema, but Kennedy did it first and did it biggest. And now that she's finally, officially, definitively stepped down as president of Lucasfilm, to the relief of literally dozens of Star Wars fans that are still invested, and beginning her extended walk into the wilderness of retirement, it seems like the right time to make what I hope will be my last ever video on this subject. Because if anyone deserves a crash and burn, it's her. Not so much because she nuked her own career and torched her own legacy, we'll get to that in due course though.
Yes.
But because she managed to burn down literally everything around her, leaving a trail of devastated IPs in her wake, while somehow holding on to power as head of one of the biggest studios in the business. Perhaps the greatest example of failing upwards that Hollywood's ever seen. And believe me, it's seen a lot. So grab your bargain bin Rey Skywalker action figure and let's embark on Crash and Burn, the Kathleen Kennedy story. Kennedy was born in 1953 in Berkeley, California, one of three daughters of Donald Kennedy, a judge, and Dionne Marie, a part-time theater actress. After majoring in telecommunications and film studies at university, she soon found work at a local TV station in San Diego as a camera operator, floor manager, and eventually a production coordinator. It was clear, though, that if she wanted to progress in the business, she'd have to move to LA, which she did in 1978, and soon landed her first job as a production assistant to John Milius, who at the time was overseeing Steven Spielberg's troubled comedy movie 1941. Basically, her job was to take notes, run errands, and make coffee. Three things that she was spectacularly bad at.
I remember Kathy came into the room with her steno pad and her pencil, and she was horrible at taking notes, and she was terrible, and she didn't really know how to do it very well. But what she did know how to do was interrupt somebody in mid-sentence. We'd be pitching ideas back and forth, and Kathy, who's supposed to be writing these ideas down, suddenly put her pencil down and would say something like, "And what if he didn't get the girl, but instead he got the dog?"
Right. Spielberg, though, for whatever reason, took a liking to her and hired her as his personal assistant for Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now, she might have been shit at taking notes, but to her credit, she was organised, diligent and efficient, able to solve problems and mediate disagreements. She soon rose through the ranks to become an associate producer on Poltergeist and finally a full-on producer for E.T. in 1982. Not bad for a 29-year-old. The pattern for her career was now set, and she would act as producer for nearly all of Spielberg's movies for the next 30 years. She wasn't what you would call a creative person because she didn't really need to be. Her job was to facilitate other people's creative visions, organise logistics, overcome all the problems and hurdles that cropped up along the way. It might not have been sexy or exciting work, it wasn't the sort of thing the general public ever got to see, but it was important and it won her a lot of respect in the industry. She was a project manager basically, and to be fair, she was good at it. Her work on the Indiana Jones movies also brought her into the orbit of two other men who would turn out to be cornerstones of her career, George Lucas and Frank Marshall. In the case of the first man, they became close colleagues and friends and stayed that way for decades. Maybe not so much today though, and in the case of the latter, they were married by 1987. As you can probably imagine, having close personal relationships with three of the most powerful and respected men in the business did wonders for her career, and by the mid-90s she was regarded as one of the most influential producers in the industry. She even co-founded Amblin Entertainment with Spielberg and the Kennedy Marshall production company company with her husbands. All good stuff, and if she'd continued on this course of producing and overseeing individual movies, she probably would have had a stellar career and retired as the single most successful female producer ever. As it turned out though, fate had other plans for Kathleen Kennedy. Remember George Lucas that she'd befriended back in the 1980s? Well, by 2012 he was getting old and burned out after making the Star Wars prequels and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Disney were offering to buy up Lucasfilm from him, and he was very much tempted by the offer, but what he really needed was a safe pair of hands to leave the company in. And from his point of view, Kennedy seemed like the perfect choice. He knew her personally, he trusted her, and when it came to experience, there was nobody who could rival her. So in late 2012, the deal was done. Disney bought over Lucasfilm, and Kathleen Kennedy was installed as president of the company. A move that few people took issue with at the time. That, however, would soon change. Things started out well, at least. J.J. Abrams, arguably the safest pair of hands in the business at the time, delivered a massive box office hit with The Force Awakens, the first movie in a new Star Wars trilogy. Yeah, it was just a glorified nostalgia trip and a thinly disguised rehash of A New Hope, but who cares? Star Wars was back, baby, and it was bigger than ever. The following year, Rogue One proved that Star Wars could release spin-offs and prequels to the main story that were still financially viable, allowing them to potentially kickstart an entire cinematic universe just like the MCU. Unfortunately, the good times weren't to last. See, going from producer on specific film projects where you have very clearly defined tasks, objectives and responsibilities to head of an entire studio that was centered around one man's creative vision is a pretty big leap that demands a whole new set of skills. Skills that Kathleen Kennedy absolutely didn't have. What she needed was a strong creative vision for where she wanted to take the franchise and how she was going to get it there. She needed to plan and map out release schedules for multiple films with directors and writers that were actually suited to the projects in hand. She needed to keep people on track, monitor progress, and juggle multiple projects at the same time. She needed to be a leader now, not a facilitator. And this is where it all started to go wrong. Kennedy had hired up-and-coming director Rian Johnson to write and direct The Last Jedi, the second movie in the sequel trilogy. Unlike JJ though, who was all about nostalgia and fan service, Rian was determined to shake things up and subvert fan expectations, not live up to them. And boy did he ever, throwing out JJ's proposed ideas for the sequel, killing off most of his plot threads, and completely going into business for himself. Now, George Lucas probably would have stepped in at this point and told him he was being a fucking idiot, but the lack of a strong overarching plan for the sequels, combined with Kennedy's attitude of, just let them get on with it, ultimately doomed the movie. TLJ turned out to be the most divisive Star Wars film of all time, completely splitting the fan base into warring factions and bringing in barely half of what Force Awakens had made. Worse, it introduced identity and gender politics into Star Wars in a way that had never existed before. And believe me, this was intentional. One of Kennedy's goals with Star Wars was to increase female representation on screen, in the belief that not only would the franchise retain the inbuilt male audience, they'd also attract a brand new female audience that had been put off until now. A modern audience, you might say. The devil, though, is in the detail, and no idea can survive bad execution. Suddenly, people were hyper-aware of overpowered, overbearing girl boss characters like Rey, Holdo, and Rose Tico, and they didn't like them. Kennedy's decision to take part in the Force's female campaign for Nike in 2017, combined with her obvious feminist sensibilities, instantly put her in the firing line. For most detractors of the sequel trilogy, she became the big bad of Star Wars, an unqualified diversity hire promoted to a job she didn't earn, presiding over a franchise she didn't build, and killing everyone's fun by populating it with annoying, unlikable self-insert power fantasies. Solo, the next spin-off movie in the Star Wars cinematic universe, bombed in spectacular fashion, partly driven by the ongoing backlash against TLJ. There would be no more spin-off movies after that. The great Rian Johnson experiment had failed. The Star Wars cinematic universe was stalled, and now they needed to get back to safer territory for the final movie. J.J. Abrams was coaxed back to tell a story he didn't really want to tell, desperately trying to undo the damage done by TLJ, only to produce an absolute Frankenstein's monster of a film in Rise of Skywalker. Reviews were terrible, the fans were disgusted, and the film barely cleared $1 billion at the global box office. A far cry from the success of The Force Awakens. With the movie business this in tatters, Kennedy and Lucasfilm retreated to TV, where they scored a surprise hit with The Mandalorian, mostly because it had Jon Favreau at the helm. The success wasn't to last though, and failures like Boba Fett and Obi-Wan Kenobi failed to capitalize on its success. Lucasfilm by this point was rapidly descending into chaos. New Star Wars projects were announced to huge fanfare, only to go nowhere and quietly fizzle out without explanation. By now, Kennedy was raiding the cupboards at Lucasfilm in search of anything she could use to prop the company up. Willow, a 1980s fantasy movie, was brought back in a baffling TV show about a pair of lesbians so disastrously awful that Disney ended up scrubbing it from their servers and memory holing it. To this day, there's no legal way to view it online. Indiana Jones was defrosted for one last adventure, mostly in the hopes of replacing him with a younger female alternative.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
It didn't work, and despite massively expensive reshoots to try to fix it, the movie flopped at the box office. The biggest humiliation for Kennedy was yet to come, though. The Acolyte, a show that will live in Star Wars infamy as long as Hollywood exists. A pair of strong, diverse female leads, lesbian space witches, weak men getting humiliated. It was all there, and it was all terrible. And in a way, it represents the final form of Kennedy's vision for Star Wars, and it was utterly eviscerated by everyone. The backlash was so bad that even Disney had to step in and promise not to make any more. Now, if you're spotting a theme here of Kennedy resurrecting old IPs and using them as a launchpad for diverse new girl boss replacements, then believe me, you're not alone.
Put a chick in it, make her gay!
She'd gambled some of the biggest franchises in Hollywood history on the modern audience, and wow, did she lose big. To paraphrase Chris Gore, she took boy brands that everyone could enjoy and turned them into girl brands that nobody enjoyed. Men felt excluded and disrespected, and women felt patronized and pandered to. The modern audience had failed to show up, and the existing audience was abandoning ship. Kennedy's greatest gamble had failed, and inevitably it all finally caught up with her. For years there had been rumors of her retirement, false starts and conspiracy theories, but one thing was obvious: Kennedy wasn't going anywhere until she was damn well good and ready. And on January 15th, the day finally came. Kathleen Kennedy was stepping down as president of Lucasfilm. You might have expected joyous celebrations at news like this, but the reaction was more like an exhausted acknowledgement from the fans. After all, what was really left to celebrate at this point? She was gone, sure, but she left behind her a studio in absolute shambles, all of its IPs drained of their goodwill and cultural reputation. There was nothing left to save from her because she'd nuked all of it. And now that the dust is settled and all is said and done, how will posterity judge Kathleen Kennedy? Will she be remembered as one of the greatest producers in Hollywood history, or the woman who oversaw the biggest act of brand destruction the industry's ever seen? She'll certainly do her best to rewrite the narrative in her favor, that's for sure, like the lengthy interview with Deadline where she focused entirely on her successes and dismissed her failures and mistakes as someone else's fault. Mostly the small but vocal minority of toxic Star Wars fans who just couldn't see her brilliance.
Really?
Yeah, sure, whatever helps you sleep at night, Kathy. You know, for someone who's all about breaking barriers and challenging female stereotypes, she's not exactly dispelling the myth that women are more averse to accountability, self-reflection, and owning their mistakes than Movie Bob is to a treadmill. Times have changed now, and paid shills and industry trades don't write the narrative on Hollywood legacies anymore. The internet does. And unfortunately for Kathleen Kennedy, the internet never forgets. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.
Hey guys, yeah, I hope y'all enjoyed that. We all can say now, bye-bye, Kathy. Star Wars will not miss you. But still, I have to admit, I look forward to it when the deal was first struck between Disney and George Lucas. I was like, oh, we're gonna get a lot. And then we got a lot. And then it was like, oh, this is not good. It was like, what did George do? Even George said, what did he do? He's like, he regrets it. I can tell you. Anyone can tell, really. He sold his baby. But we're here looking forward, not backwards. But I hope you made it this far. You want to see more, you don't forget to like it, comment below, share, and subscribe. And then I hope you had an awesome night and the rest of your day goes really well. And I'll see you next video. Bye.